Columbus, Ohio, 2025. The holidays are winding down, quiet neighborhoods, decorated homes, and families preparing for the new year. But inside one suburban house, something unimaginable has happened. A husband and wife are found shot to death in their own home while their young children remain inside, unharmed. As detectives search for answers, evidence begins pointing towards someone from the family's past. Surveillance footage, a late-night drive across state lines, and allegations of years of threats all lead investigators in the same direction. What appeared to be a happy new beginning may have ended in a deadly act of obsession and revenge.
Welcome to Unlawful Acts, the podcast where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime, unearthing the shocking and often hidden stories behind the world's most infamous criminals. I'm Susan Davis, your host.
And I'm your co-host, Jocelyn Frankusen.
So before we get into the murders, before, we get into the surveillance footage and the indictments and the national headlines, there was a family. There was Monique and Spencer Tepe. They were known to their friends, as Mo and Spencer. They were the kind of friends that everybody invited because they enjoyed hanging out with them so much, because they were always just happy and sort of upbeat. And so they always got invited to all the parties and all the places and what have you. But when they met, they had an instant connection. They were one of those couples that I think they met on a social website. They had an instant connection, and they said that they were like a match that was meant to be together. Spencer's cousin actually said that he had recalled Monique telling him that the first date that they had, they just talked all night long and into the morning. And so they couldn't have been a better matchup. And quite frankly, they couldn't take their eyes off each other, according to all accounts. So both of them had gone to Ohio State University. They sort of figured that out once they met. But they had one of those lives on the go. They had 2 children, but most of it was built around their little family and friends. So now Spencer, he was 37 years old, and he was a dentist. And he had gone to Ohio State University to get his dental degree, and then he built a career for himself. And his colleagues always described him as the kind of guy that you could depend on. Always showed up on time, was always there when he was supposed to be, that kind of guy. So when he didn't show up that one morning in December, they were concerned immediately. So now Monique was 39 years old. So she was a little bit older than him. Her brother-in-law would say that she lit up every single room she walked into. She was that kind of gal. But she had actually grown up in Ohio. She was born in Chicago, but she had grown up in Ohio, and she was just, that little girl who loved to read books and ride horses and play soccer, just your kind of outgoing kind of gal. She loved little kids. She loved working at daycare. She actually volunteered at daycares when she was younger. And then when she went to Ohio State, she studied for her bachelor's, and I think she got her master's actually from Ohio State in childcare. So now, when she was at Ohio State, though, she wasn't just sort of passing through. She had a goal. She was trying to She wasn't like some of the other students. When they get there, they're kind of trying to find themselves. That's what freshman year, I guess, is all about. I don't
Most
know.
college students are still trying to find themselves from start to
right.
stop.
And so, but she did know that she wanted to work with children. She knew that she wanted to be that person where people felt like drawn to. So her whole education was all about that. Her friends and family, of course, remember her as that bubbly, warm sort of person. She apparently had a very infectious laugh. And, she just had that natural pull for people towards her. And then at Ohio State, she is when she first crossed paths with Michael McKee. He was there they enrolled at the same time in 2005. She was there, of course, studying childcare. He was there studying medicine. He was going to be a doctor. So on paper, they kind of looked like that, that well-suited, ambitious couple, on kind of promising paths, sort of heading the same but, different directions. But years later, they would just say that the college connection was really one of those connections that Monique would eventually work very hard to escape. But here's what I keep coming back to. Monique was building towards something. Michael seemed to be one of those guys that's just sort of, moving the ball side to side. According to people who met him later, all they ever saw was his professional facade, and he was always struck them as the kind of guy who really wanted to possess someone. So that's really what he was looking for.
But at this point, nobody knew that, there was anything going on aside from maybe ambition or maybe, pursuant of really trying to capture something in his own right to have something to be proud of.
Yeah, but, so here's where the story gets kind of dark. Because Monique had been married to Michael at some point. They got married. To the outside world, McKee he kind of looked like that picture of achievement. He was a vascular surgeon. He was educated, professional, someone, that he had multiple licenses across several states, but he looked like somebody who could, he was the kind of guy that could walk into a hospital, put on a white coat, and people trusted him with their lives. So, it was a presence that he had that couldn't really be denied because of who he was. But according to people close to Monique, the man she experienced inside the marriage was completely different. It was like when they got married, a switch just flipped. And he became controlling and cruel, sexually abusive to her, and she felt he was quite dangerous. So they had met, both of them, when they were at Ohio State. They dated for, a couple years. They got married in 2015, and it could have been like I say, it could have been that marriage that was built on this cute little professional couple that were, moving forward in their lives. But the marriage didn't last because of all that was going on behind the scenes. And within 7 months, Monique had left the marriage. She was out. The divorce was finalized in 2017. And according to the affidavit that was later filed in court, Monique had confided to people close to her that she was afraid of him. She had lived through all this abuse and this constant fear and the threats that he made. She even said that some of the statements that she said that kind of stand out above all the other stuff that she said was that he told people that McKee always told her that he could kill her anytime he wanted. And that he would always find her. If she moved, he would buy a house next to her, and that she would always be his wife.
What strikes me about that is how specific it is. It's not, oh, I'll find you, I'll know where you are. It's, no, I will literally buy the house next door. You're never getting away from me. And it just goes to show that you truly, outside looking in, never know what is going on in somebody's home life. And it's just, that's a different kind of threat. It's almost like a plan. It's a blueprint.
Yeah, absolutely. After the divorce, Monique, she did everything right. She changed her name back to Sabatuski, and she moved on. She eventually met Spencer, and they got married in December of 2020. It was right in the middle of the pandemic, but according to friends, they said that, well, when you know, we're going to get married anyway. They have two little children, Amelia and Beckham. Amelia's 4, Beckham is a year old. So they just kind of had this warm, full, busy life and had moved on. So for Monique, I think that, it was more than just her happiness as a part of that moving on, because it really meant that worst chapter in her life was not going to define her whole story.
Absolutely.
She wasn't McKee's wife anymore. She was Spencer's wife. She was a mom to Amelia and Beckham. So she was happy. She had moved on, and she was really happy with her life. So, but, the thing is there's kind of a certain thing about a dangerous person. And a healthy person that hears that their ex is moved on and they're doing great and everything's, good for them, that might bug them just a little bit if they're actually honest with themselves. But a dangerous person is a completely different story. They're, a controlling person and a possessive person. They don't see her happiness as her happiness. That's the weird part of it. It has nothing to do with her. They take it as a personal insult, and then they feel like they've been publicly rejected and humiliated and replaced, quite obviously. So a friend of Monique's, she actually told People magazine, she said that Michael thought Monique could not live without her and that she needed him. So, watching her actually thrive and in a new marriage and a mom, that just totally destroyed his little fragile ego. So, and that sort of brings us to Michael McKee. And we have to remember as we go through this story that this case has not been adjudicated yet. It has not gone before the court yet. And so when we talk about some of the things that went on, these things are alleged. So I wanted to sort of throw that blanket over the story just so that we couch it properly. But after the divorce, Michael, he went on to Virginia to finish his medical degree. And then when he finished his residency there, he then went to California, to Maryland, to Nevada, Illinois, and he got separate licenses in all those states. Not exactly sure why, but 3 months before the murders, he was hit with a malpractice suit. I guess there was a surgery that he had done, I believe, in Las Vegas, and it didn't go the way it should have in some way, and so he was hit with a lawsuit. So he, by 2024, then had moved to Illinois. So he was living in a luxury apartment. Gosh, he was living in downtown Chicago in Lincoln Park, which is an amazing, extravagant, beautiful neighborhood there.
It's a fabulous neighborhood.
Yeah, and so life seemed completely normal, like he was just this normal guy. But, this is a part that's sort of bugging me. because Monique's life had moved forward. Her address had changed. She had changed her name back and then got married and changed her name again. She had children. Her whole world had completely changed. But Michael's life was moving geographically. But, he'd moved to new cities and he was doing new things. But the people who knew him only knew him professionally. They didn't know anything else about him other than who he was as a doctor. So, according to the prosecutors, something in Michael never moved on. He was still sort of stuck back there, in that prior relationship. So it was described that he was always obsessed with her and still sort of fixated on the insult of her leaving, and that this idea that she somehow belonged to him. So in December, it's December 6th now, about 24 days before Christmas. It's a Big Ten championship game in Indianapolis, and Monique and Spencer went to the game. It's about 150 miles from where they live. So they go to the game and, they're just having fun. When a couple gets out without their children, they just, it's a fun time. And so they're with their friends, they're laughing, they're hanging out, and there's all this great energy. But, suddenly Monique leaves and she goes back to the hotel and she tells, she told him, her friends told investigators that she was upset and she was visibly shaken. Something went on. She left the game. She didn't come back. And so something, had gotten to her, because back in Columbus, 150 miles away from where she was, surveillance cameras were recording something around their house. So
this is a moment where I'd like to take a second to pause, because I think that this is a major turning point in our story. Our intuition as individuals, especially as women, is rarely ever wrong. And here she is 150 miles away from her home, and she just felt it. Something was off. Something wasn't quite sitting right. She knew something was wrong. This is the exact night that he was surveilled walking around her house, and she was right.
Yeah, so there was a man at their house. He didn't knock on the door. He didn't go up on the porch and sort of knock on the door like a normal person.
So terrifying.
He's moving around the house.
He's casing the property.
Yeah, he's looking in the windows. He's spending time there. He spent a good bit of time there. He was studying the doors and the windows, the cameras around the house, really kind of walking around, kind of looking at the neighborhood. And investigators would later identify that man as Michael McKee. So he wasn't on the surgical schedule that day in Rockford, and he lived over 300 miles away. I think it was about 350 miles. He would have, there he is in her yard.
What strikes me is how did he know that she wasn't going to be there that night of all nights? It's just, you have to imagine that he was surveilling her for some time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we really kind of sort of sit with what that means, because an ex doesn't usually drive 5 hours to go to a former wife's house, not leave a note, not make a phone call, none of it. And that's not even obsession, certainly not in the sort of messy, emotional way we think about it. It's really reconnaissance. It's, where are the cameras? What's the best way to get in? What's the best way to get out? When is the street quiet? When is it darkest in the neighborhood and in the alleys behind the neighborhood? The law enforcement investigator who spoke to News Nation said whoever did this plainly knew where the cameras were and avoided them. So that was, in their mind's eye, the whole purpose for going there. And the part that's sort of impossible to wrap your head around is that Monique was in, like you say, she was in Indianapolis. She was feeling afraid 150 miles away because the exact same night there was a man walking around her house. We don't know if she got a text or a call or anything that would indicate who was out there, but she was absolutely, totally afraid. And Spencer told the friends the same night that she really had a right to be scared, whatever was going on. But, the funny thing is, when you look back, that December 6th evening was really kind of one of those kind of warnings that sort of internally shout, and the problem is that nobody really, sometimes takes that loud warning in their head very seriously, because they just don't understand how they should be listening to that loud voice inside their head.
Exactly. And sometimes these intuitive calls just absolutely should not and cannot be ignored. And here's a question for our observers. What would you have done in that moment? You're at a game with your friends. You're in the middle of a parents' night out. You've got a babysitter or whatever, all the, necessary measures to have a great night. But something back at home is totally off. Would you leave? Would you call for help? Would you tell the others what's going on? Let's get the conversation going. What do you think Monique could have done to protect herself?
Yeah, and this is 24 days before Christmas, or actually before the murders. So there's 24 days from that day to the date that December 30th date. So you think a lot about that in this case, because in true crime stories, we have a tendency to just skip right to that night or the day of, or that moment that it happens. But the real horror is actually in the gap, in the planning, in the thinking about it. And, I'm going to go here, I'm going to do this, and thinking about something so totally terrible and then actually planning to do something. And so somewhere in those 24 days, a decision's made, a weapon's either obtained or retrieved from its location. A route to the house is then mapped out. I mean, it's over 300 miles from Michael Key's house. It's like a 5-hour drive. And so a time's chosen, and a silencer was then part of the plan. The last part is something that you really can't get past, because a silencer isn't something that you get in a moment of rage. It's not a reactionary thing. It's a planning thing.
Absolutely.
Because you have to plan ahead. So he's thinking about witnesses.
Absolutely.
He's thinking about waking up the neighborhood. He knows there's going to be 2 children in the home and a dog. And so he took the time and the effort to think about all of that and plan for that when he got there. So experts actually describe domestic violence in a there's a separation phase. It can happen when the controlling abuser finally confronts the reality that they've permanently lost control, and they're out and they're forgotten. And that's a very dangerous place to be, because Monique hadn't just left. She'd been gone for 8 years.
And 8 years is a very long time. And of course, nobody really knows what's going on in someone's home life aside from those people living in the home. So Monique knew how contentious things were. She knew what she was up against when it comes to her ex-husband. But she also knew that there had been a significant amount of space and time in between the time that she left and the time where her life was ultimately taken. So I feel like during that point in time, she probably might have let her guard down a little bit. She might have found that she was safe. And, it's really crazy to me that he was able to hold on to that anger for that amount of time, because most people just up and move on.
Sure. Oh, yeah, they've been divorced since 2017. She got married in 2020. So, and she'd had 2 children and built a whole new life.
She has a
it's like,
completely different life.
And according to investigators, the danger from Michael McKee never went away.
Of course.
It just sort of waited. And so, for some people, a relationship doesn't end just because the court said it did. Or when the victim, if you will, moves on. It ends when the control is restored. And so it ends at that point, or when a person can no longer control or intimidate the person that's left. So that brings us to the night of December 30th in 2025. It's been such a short time and the events have moved so quickly. It's hard to imagine that this is just in December of 2025. So someone drives from Illinois 5 hours in the dark towards Columbus. Alone in the car, alone with the things that are rattling around in their head. The neighborhood, of course, is quiet when he arrives. It's, it's past 2 a.m. And the street is exactly the way it looks, the way that because he had been there before, and he knew it would look like that. And he knew which houses had lights on. In this case, there was a light that was left on at the Tepe house. But he knew the dog, he knew the alleyway, and he sort of moved the same way he had moved before. He kind of crept around the house, moved slowly in the yard. He was controlled and deliberate in all of his movements. So, it's just after Christmas. The decorations are still up, and, the children's things are all over the floor. Because, we're right after Christmas. It's just, kind of that scene that normal couples have when there's a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old in the house. So upstairs, Spencer and Monique, they're curled up together sleeping. They feel, they think they're safe. So he goes inside and he goes, kind of creeps up the stairs. He slowly opens that bedroom door and he steps into the room quietly and deliberately. He draws his gun with the silencer on it and he steps forward next to the bed and fires multiple shots into Spencer and into Monique. And then he plans to leave after it was over. The dark figure walked back through the dark alley. He got in his car and drove north. Now, according to the autopsy files that Fox News was able to review, Spencer was shot 7 times. It only takes 1 shot to kill somebody. He was shot 7 times. Monique was shot directly in the chest. They felt like he had died within seconds to minutes after he was shot, and that she had pretty much died immediately. So this was the end of a plan that had been building for years. The silencer, of course, meant that the shots were muffled. The neighborhood was quiet when he goes out the door. The children didn't wake up. The dog wasn't barking. There was, he just basically kind of slipped out the door and left. And so the next morning, of course, Beckham, who's a year old, he can't get out of his crib. He's just in there crying. And investigators believe that when the police finally arrived, he'd been crying for hours because he's hungry. He wants his mom and dad, but everything has changed now.
It's so absolutely devastating to think about that. I mean, just sitting here with you and recounting the details about what happened the night before, my arms are just covered in goosebumps, and I feel sick just thinking about that little baby in his crib. Of course, because of the silencer, he has no idea that there's been any type of intrusion or commotion in his house,
Sure.
most likely. You know, we can't make assumptions for him, of course, but odds are, is like you said, he just woke up in the morning because he was hungry and he was looking for somebody to comfort for him and crying out for his mom and dad, and nobody came.
Yeah.
And at that point in time, because he's so little, you know, he doesn't have the capacity to understand anything besides the fact that he's hungry and nobody's coming for him. He doesn't know at all how much his life has changed in that night. It's just
Yeah, and
awful.
you know, even though the perpetrator is allegedly Michael McKee, why Spencer?
Yeah.
You know, he wasn't incidental. He was the husband. He was the man that Monique had started her new life with. So he was the person in you know, psychologically in these kind of situations, he's the person who represented more than anything else that Monique had gotten free of McKee.
Absolutely.
And so, and they had built a real life together. So investigators believe that Michael McKee was that dark figure, that was him, and that he drove 325 miles back to his condo in Rockford and went to work that next morning. And so, you know, the next day, you know, that neighborhood sort of comes to life the way neighborhoods do. You know, people are having their coffee, they're checking their phones, leaving for work. But Spencer doesn't show up for work. Now, again, as I said earlier, he's the kind of guy that always showed up. He was dependable, and he was committed to his patients and his practice. And so the people he worked with knew immediately something was wrong, because he wouldn't leave a patient hanging like that, because he didn't call. When they called, he didn't answer. So they then, you know, they didn't wait around. They moved really fast. And so around 9 o'clock, someone from that office called the police and said, hey, we need you to do a welfare check. In the meantime, a friend went over to the house, and then all we have is this hysterical phone call where she's, you know, she's screaming, there's a body, you know, there's blood. He's lying next to the bed. And so the police, of course, get there within minutes of that 911 call. And upstairs, they found Spencer, who had been shot multiple times, and Monique shot in the chest. The dog was unharmed. The children were not harmed at all. And, you know, Beckham was in his room, you know, crying his little eyes out. And as far as we know, Amelia was still in her room asleep. So, you know, the very first look at this scene, investigators knew that this was something completely different that they were dealing with, because there was nothing missing. The house wasn't trashed. The children were still alive. This wasn't a stranger who had come into their home.
Not at all.
This told them that this is personal. So the Columbus police chief, Elaine Bryant, would later put it into words, 3 words: targeted domestic violence. So now we have a completely different kind of investigation, because now we got to go backward, because at this point they really don't know who did it. So now they have to go backward into Spencer's history. They have to go backward into Monique's history and sort of look through all their relationships, you know, college years, all searching for anybody who would want this couple dead, of course. And it pretty quickly led to someone specific. Back to the divorce that had been finalized 8 years earlier, and back to this man who allegedly told her that he could kill her any time and she would always be his wife.
God.
So, and you'd think that moving around in the dark and being incredibly careful around these cameras, that he had avoided being seen on the cameras. But darkness isn't what it used to be, because cameras can see fairly clearly in the dark. What they can't see can be enhanced. So the images are enhanced, and the Columbus detectives start pulling camera footage from everywhere, from, neighbors' doorbells cameras, from neighbors' cameras, from traffic lights, from, any camera coming into that neighborhood, going out of that neighborhood, trying to look for cars coming in and going out, or anybody coming in by foot or what have you. They did find the figure in the alley alongside the house between 2 and 5 in the morning, and that figure was moving deliberately slow, but was moving like somebody who'd sort of been over the route several times in their head. They weren't just kind of trying to figure it out in the middle of the night, trying different windows or what have you. They knew exactly what they were doing. And they also found something else when they went through all the footage. They found vehicle tracking data. And so a car had come into the Wineland Park area where they lived shortly before the homicides, and it had left after the homicides. And when they tracked it down, and the car was heading north toward Illinois, they traced that car to Rockford, Illinois, registered to a Michael David McKee. So they knew that he'd been in the neighborhood that night, allegedly. So now they had a name and an address. They went and pulled, the footage from December 6th, and they believe that McKee is also the man in that video, kind of creeping around the house that day. They confirmed that he wasn't on any surgical schedule on those days. They interviewed friends and family, and that's sort of when the whole picture sort of came together for the investigators, because the friends told them about the alleged strangling and the sexual abuse and the threats, and that he said he could kill her any time, that he would always find her, he would, buy the house next to her, and that she would always be his wife. These things came up over and over again, and as they were interviewing witnesses. And so they quickly go out and they get a search warrant of his condo there in Lincoln Park. And in it, they found multiple guns. But one gun in particular, when they ran it through the National Ballistics database, it came back as one of the primary it was a match with the evidence from the crime scene. So now we've got the gun matching the crime scene.
And this is somebody that's a surgeon.
Right.
So he understands wound, trajectory. He understands what a bullet does to a human body. He allegedly keeps the gun. He has this whole plan that he's articulated and executed allegedly.
Right.
But of course, he just kind of goes on and does his own thing. So either he's completely arrogant or he really sincerely thought that he was going to get away with it.
Yeah.
Or both. Maybe both.
I've been sort of sitting in that detail since I read it. This guy, again, he allegedly drove 325 miles all night long, 5 hours. Maybe he thought nobody could put it together that quickly. I don't know. Maybe he thought the distance between Rockford and Columbus, Ohio was enough to be a buffer to shield him from suspicion. But the evidence is being reviewed camera by camera, kind of like you would review any crime scene, and it's sort of being matched to the sort of planning it would take to pull this sort of murder off. And of course, the man in the dark was becoming a name. He was, we're getting his face, and of course, we know his address at that point.
I mean, let's just play jury for a second. Observers, I want to know what you would think as well. I mean, if we're sitting in the courtroom right now together, which piece of evidence do you think is the most damning? Like, which one really stands out to you? You know, to me, obviously, all of these things are circumstantial, because I'm sure he can argue, well, I wasn't really there, or I was, but it wasn't because of her, and so on. But like, being at her house on December 6th is a standout to me. You know, while she was away, enjoying time away with her friends and her husband. The surveillance footage from the night of the murders, was it the fact that his car was tracked from Ohio, his vehicle that was registered to him personally? I mean, come on. Like, the ballistics match, the fact that nothing was stolen, that this is clearly a personal vendetta, that nothing else is untouched or unharmed. I want to know what our observers think, like, what stands out the most.
Silencer.
The silencer.
Right.
I mean, that to me, the silencer is number one. Because if you buy a silencer, or you adhere a silencer to a firearm, you're going in there trying to get in and get out. You're not trying to cause a scene. You're not trying to scare anybody. You're not trying to do anything besides shoot to kill.
Right.
You want to get in and get out.
Right. So then on January 10th, now remember, this is December 30th when these murders took place. Now on January 10th of 2026, the federal agents and the local police in Rockford, they move in on the St. Anthony Medical Center where he works, but he wasn't there. So they're kind of like, okay, where is this guy? They found out that he had gone to lunch, and they found him in Chick-fil-A. They found out that he had gone to breakfast because he had, leaves quite early. And, they go in the Chick-fil-A, people are just sitting around. They have no idea they're eating their breakfast. They're having their coffee. They have no idea that a man who allegedly just murdered 2 people is sitting right there next to him.
Yeah.
And so, I think that this is kind of the best place to sort of end this story, because that's what McKee had sort of been banking on his whole life, that ordinariness of his life. He was just this sort of guy who sort of disappeared in the woodwork because all you ever saw is that professional aspect of him. He had a luxury apartment. He lived in a nice neighborhood. All of it was designed to make him just look like, Joe Blow. Had no reason to look at him, nothing to see here sort of thing. But Monique knew who he really was.
Absolutely.
And she told people. She carried that knowledge for years. And in the end, the man that she was afraid of was sitting in this fast food restaurant with federal agents walking through the door.
She was afraid of him, I'm sure, for all of those years, and her intuition alarms had gone off more than once, and she was right.
Yeah, she was right about him the whole time. And so McKee is reportedly calm during the whole arrest. I mean, he doesn't show any emotion at all. It's it's not surprise. It's not he says nothing to during the arrest. He just, maybe it was shock. I don't know. Maybe it's just the arrogance of thinking that his plan was sort of airtight. We really don't know. But he was sort of weirdly calm during the whole arrest. So the charges themselves sort of came through in layers, because first you have murder, then you have the charge of premeditated murder. Then on January 16th, the grand jury handed down 4 counts of aggravated murder, 2 per victim. Something that doesn't make sense to me, but that's how it works. And I think it had something to do with the silencer. And they also charged him with burglary because he had entered someone's home without their permission. And so this is sort of the prosecutor's way of saying, look, this wasn't an accident. It was pre-planned, and we don't believe that he was in a rage. And so the silencer charge says he planned for the children and the noise specifically, and that he planned for all of that stuff that was happening around him when he got there. Now, Michael actually waived extradition and came back to Ohio, accompanied by the officers. And then when he was at his arraignment on January 23rd, he actually didn't say anything. Again,
Really?
He was very stoic. He looked into the cameras because that's how it was done, was a video arraignment. And it was just his attorney who spoke, and 2 words: not guilty. And so that's really what legally mattered right now. That was what the arraignment was for. So the case now goes to court, and we'll follow it. But this case kind of gets covered as a double murder, and it is. I mean, two people are dead, and there's 2 children that are growing up without parents. But all of that is true. But underneath, kind of the subterfuge to this murder case from the very beginning, it was a stalking case, really. So because, I think stalking is kind of one of the most scariest part, because it's difficult to protect against. And it's usually completely misunderstood, because we sort of build in our head what stalking means. It means that somebody's following you, they're texting you 50, 60 times a day. They're tracking where you go. They're showing up where you are, looking through windows and, that type of thing, sort of making themselves impossible to ignore in a sort of designed to harass, intimidate, and frighten you. But that's not real stalking, according to the experts. The experts will tell you that real stalking is the occasional drive-by. Maybe once a month, twice a month, what have you. It can be by checking your social posts from a fake account. It can be showing up when you're not home, and they know that you're not home, just to let you know that they know where you live. So it's kind of that terrifying stalking, because it's so quiet and so hard to detect, that for the victim, it's extremely hard to prove. And so because it's so hard to prove, when you have this small, like, gee, they drove by my house, they know where I live,
Mm-hmm.
they, parked in front of the house or what have you. That fear kind of sounds like to others as just anxiety. And unfortunately, a lot of times to law enforcement, it just sounds like sort of that relationship drama that they hear all the time.
Of course.
And so they kind of chalk it up to somebody overreacting until, of course, it becomes evidence that they have to follow. So, it's not because they don't want to protect people. It's just that that's usually how that plays out. But Monique, she told people she was afraid. She was very vocal about it. She had confided in friends and family about the abuse, the threats. Again, those specific words that he had used. And that's sort of that brutal truth about domestic violence murders. The warning signs are there, but they aren't recognized as warning signs until somebody is dead. And we see this over and over again.
It's just devastating. I mean, that's what gets me, right? It's
Sure.
She wasn't silent.
Right.
She said exactly what was going on. She said exactly what he had said to her. She expressed the fear that she was experiencing. She was vocal about it. She told her family and her friends. And, there's a very distinct gap in between I'm afraid and I can prove it. And of course, investigators and authorities are put in a hard spot when it comes to these kinds of things because so many people are not forthright about what they're experiencing at home or are not forthright about their genuine fear because they're trying to make a situation maybe bigger than it is because they want to get back at that other person or so on.
Sure, that happens a lot.
This is not that case at all, in my opinion. I mean, I think she did everything that she could to express how scared she really was of this man.
Well, at the time of the murders, there were no police reports on file about McKee. There wasn't any sort of restraining order on file at the time. There wasn't any official report or anything that said, this man had threatened a woman's life. But that's really not Monique's fault.
No.
Because reporting in these situations can feel like something that's actually going to put you in a more dangerous place.
Absolutely.
Because it can escalate that person that you're so afraid of. It can make them feel humiliated. And sometimes it can feel a little pointless when you don't sort of get that protection that you believe you should, and that person is successful in sort of intimidating you. But those, it doesn't make the feelings any less valid or real.
Of course not.
It just makes it more difficult to prove. And so the murders happened on December 30th, but I believe that fuse may have been lit way back when that divorce was filed, and it just burned hotter. Every single time he saw something on a social network or saw that she got married and that she had children and that, that she was moving forward without him and, that she was fine. She was better than fine without Michael. She was blossoming. But again, for a dangerous person, these things are like a continuing insult. They sometimes, and I really don't say this lightly, that's sometimes the most dangerous time. It's the moment isn't necessarily when someone first leaves. It's years later.
Totally.
It's when the abuser is forced to accept the fact that the control is gone forever, and they decide that if they can't have them, then nobody can have them. And, that sort of gives you chills to think about. But, honestly, that's really where a lot of these psychologically, these types of situations happen. And so I want to end the story where it started. Amelia and Beckham are both growing up with their mom and dad, and in the way that their family has spoken about Monique and Spencer and the children. I mean, it's truly heartbreaking if you watch it. Spencer he was a dedicated family man, a guy who cared about his patients. He volunteered, in the Big Brother and Big Sister organizations. Monique, by every account, she made people feel safe. She valued children and worked in a daycare. These weren't just victims. These were people who deserved to grow old with their children and deserved to see them grow up. But they didn't get those years. And so here we are. They were real. They were loved. And that matters regardless of what the courts ultimately decide about this situation. So as of this recording, Michael has pleaded not guilty. There's a preliminary hearing set very soon here on June 17th. The case is moving through the courts, and the evidence, of course, will be tested. A jury's going to decide what they think, and we'll be there when it happens.
Absolutely. And I mean, my blood is absolutely boiling right now. Just listening to this story again and absorbing the details and thinking about the genuine fear that was existing, in the darkness and the shadows of those 8 years that went by in between the time that she left her ex-husband to the time where her life was taken. I mean, I have 2 words for Michael McKee in response to his not guilty, which is, yeah, right. Yeah, right.
Well, again.
But of course, we are innocent until proven guilty. And that is how our courts operate, and I respect that. But again, observers, we really want to hear your thoughts. I want to know what you think. I want to know how you're feeling about this. Are you as angry as I am? Because I can barely sit through this story and listen to it right now. It just breaks my heart and makes me just sick thinking about it. So please have a conversation with us. Like, comment, subscribe, drop your thoughts in the comments below. New episodes come out every week, and you do not want to miss what we have in store for you next.
So now, if somebody in your life is scared, listen to them, kind of like their life depends on it, because sometimes it does.
Sometimes it does.
So until next time, stay safe, my friends, and join Jocelyn and I as we investigate another unlawful act.